In a small, remote village nestled deep within the verdant forests of West Africa, life had always been defined by tradition and belief. The village, known as Ngolo, was home to three distinct groups: those who followed the ancient ways of the fetish priest, those who had embraced Christianity and followed their pastor, and those who adhered to the teachings of Islam under the guidance of their imam. For generations, these groups coexisted peacefully, their lives intertwined by the rhythms of the land and the seasons. One day, a strange rumor began to spread through Ngolo. It was said that the forest had become angry, that the spirits were restless. The river that ran through the village had begun to dry up, and the crops, which had always grown lush and green, were withering in the fields. Animals, once abundant, had become scarce, and a heavy, oppressive heat hung over the village, choking the life out of the once vibrant community. The villagers, desperate and afraid, turned to their spiritual leaders for guidance. The fetish priest, a man named Kofi, was the first to speak. He claimed that the spirits were angry because the villagers had neglected the old ways, abandoning their traditional practices in favor of foreign religions. He urged them to return to the ancient rituals, to make sacrifices to the spirits of the forest and river, and to appease the gods who had long protected their ancestors. Meanwhile, the pastor, a fiery preacher named Reverend James, called for a day of prayer and fasting. He told his congregation that the troubles they faced were a test of their faith, a challenge from God to see if they would remain steadfast in their beliefs. He urged them to reject the old ways completely and to place their trust in the power of Jesus Christ. But in the midst of this turmoil, the imam, a wise and quiet man named Ibrahim, took a different approach. He did not speak of angered spirits or divine tests. Instead, he reminded his followers of the importance of humility, obedience, and trust in Allah. He encouraged them to remain patient, to continue their prayers, and to follow the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He urged them to be kind to their neighbors, to care for the sick and the elderly, and to share whatever food and water they had, no matter how scarce it might be. As the days turned into weeks, the situation in Ngolo grew worse. The river dried up completely and the crops failed. Hunger and thirst began to gnaw at the villagers, and fear turned to desperation. The followers of the fetish priest gathered around his shrine, offering sacrifices of chickens, goats, and even their most precious belongings. They chanted and danced, hoping to appease the spirits, but the drought persisted. The Christians, too, gathered in the church, praying fervently, fasting, and singing hymns of praise, but still, the heavens remained silent. In contrast, the Muslims of the village continued their quiet routine. They prayed 5 times a day, shared their meager provisions, and helped their neighbors, regardless of their beliefs. They did not complain or panic, but instead placed their trust in Allah's will, believing that whatever happened was part of a greater plan. One fateful night, a violent storm rolled in from the horizon. Thunder cracked the sky, and lightning illuminated the village in blinding flashes. The wind howled through the trees, and rain began to pour down in torrents. The villagers, all of them, rushed out of their homes, rejoicing at the sight of the long-awaited rain. But the rain did not stop. It continued for days on end, turning the dry earth into a quagmire. The river, once dry, swelled into a raging torrent, overflowing its banks and sweeping away homes and crops. The villagers who had placed their faith in the fetish priest and the pastor were caught unprepared. Their homes were washed away, and many were lost to the floodwaters. Only the Muslim families, who had remained calm and prepared, survived the deluge. They had heeded the warnings of their imam, who had told them to build their homes on higher ground, to store food and water, and to be prepared for whatever Allah had decreed. When the floodwaters receded, Ngolo was a changed place. The village had been almost entirely destroyed, and only a few families remained, those who had followed the imam's advice. In the aftermath of the disaster, the surviving villagers came to the Muslims, seeking shelter, food, and guidance. The Muslims, who had always been generous and compassionate, opened their homes to those in need, regardless of their faith. The Imam, Ibrahim, welcomed everyone, offering words of comfort and wisdom. He did not boast of their survival or claim superiority, but instead reminded everyone that they had been spared not by their own actions, but by the mercy of Allah. Over time, the village of Ngolo was rebuilt, but it was a different place. The survivors, having witnessed the power of faith, humility, and community, began to adopt the ways of the Muslims. The fetish priest's shrine fell into disrepair, and the church was never rebuilt. The villagers, once divided by their beliefs, now came together in prayer and in work, united by a shared understanding of their place in the world and the power of true faith. And so, Ngolo became a village where the call to prayer echoed through the hills, where the teachings of Islam guided the lives of its people, and where the lessons of the past were never forgotten. The story of Ngolo was passed down through generations, a reminder that in times of hardship, it is not the loudest voice or the most dramatic ritual that will save us, but the quiet strength of faith, obedience, and compassion.